Now, as we head to Jubilee 2025, which begins tomorrow here at the Holy See, in June, Pope Francis gave a major speech and noted that debt relief needs to be a key focus of Jubilee 2025, just as it was in Jubilee 2000. That we must, with world leaders over the next 5 years of campaigns, move forward debt relief, economic aid, in order to serve the poorest people on the planet, as well as create a more just financial system that Pope Francis continues to articulate the need for in our global world, in our economy. We're very honored today to be joined by many members of the Vatican Press Corps, as well as journalists from around the world. We would, during the press conference, like to give journalists the floor who are in person or online. So if you are a journalist who's online, we'd ask that you identify yourself in the chat with what outlet you're from, and then we can identify you so that you can ask direct questions of the panelists. So please identify yourself online, and you will be given access to ask questions in addition to the members of the press corps that are here with us today. So at this time, it's my honor to really acknowledge my mentor and dear friend, Cardinal Silvano Tomasi, one of the world's most important church leaders on these issues, who will offer an opening prayer and some brief reflections. Cardinal Tomasi, I turn the floor to you.
We place ourselves in the presence of God and we ask Him to bless our meeting as we gather together to reflect. And the practical ways our solidarity can support the dignity of every person and of the countries that are affected by debt, external debt. We ask the Lord to give us His light and grace so that we may be guided in the right direction and may be kept as engaged as ever in pursuing with renewed hope in this coming Jubilee. To pursue a sense of justice, not only for the countries that are affected by heavy indebtedness, but also for the people, the families that pay the consequences of unfair conditions placed and the financing for development. We hope and pray that slowly but surely the international community will find some practical mechanism to ease the necessity to cooperate in developing the poorer countries. but also to find a fair deal, a method that is new, that is based not on the war and on the imposition of the will of the strongest, but it is fair and based on dialogue and mutual respect. In this vision, we hope that eventually we find a road that will lead us to make this planet a better place for everyone, that there is more justice, more fairness, and a sense of hope that notwithstanding the present limits, we will be able to move forward and enjoy, as Pope Francis says, a universal fraternity, where we truly are all brothers and sisters and are supporting each other without exclusion for anyone, country or group or individuals. But we all participate with equal opportunity in creating an environment that is acceptable for everyone and that is fair for all. With this hope and with this conviction, we keep working and we keep trying to make the international community a home for everyone with a sense of hope and the joy of working according to the plan that the Creator had for all human beings. And with this conviction, we try to brainstorm together and pursue practical ways to make the ideas that we have, as have been pointed out by John Paul II in the great Jubilee of the year 2000, and that are pursued and continued by the encouragement and the words of Pope Francis. Altogether, we can hope, notwithstanding the difficulties and the failures, that we will achieve the objective of inclusion and of respect for the dignity of every person and of every community.
Thank you, Cardinal Silvano, for that prayer and your opening remarks. One of the issues that Cardinal Silvano Tomasi highlighted, I think, was very critical, as he has been one of the primary advocates on the message of Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, as well as Pope Francis, and major interfaith religious leaders in terms of calling for the implementation of an international bankruptcy process to deal with debt relief, poverty, as well as climate issues. It's largely been because of Cardinal Silvano Tomasi's leadership that we have moved forward agreements that have won $130 billion in debt relief, and why we have 54 million kids in Africa who never would have seen the inside of a classroom now going to school. It has been because Cardinal Silvano has followed these calls that for the Jubilee 2000 movement, which is now the Jubilee 2025 movement, Cardinal Silvano was successful in moving forward some of the major debt relief agreements that we have now at the service of the poor and the service of our world. One of the very important moments that Pope John Paul II moved forward, as well as Pope Benedict, as well as Pope Francis, is this a critical call for an international bankruptcy process. It was the main theme of Pope Francis's speech to the United Nations in 2015. The petitions that Pope John Paul II had called for, 30 million petitions that religious communities gathered around the world, not only called in 2000 for debt cancellation, but called for critical changes to the international financial system, shifts to the international financial architecture, so that we can achieve more equality in our world. As we begin today, we'd first like to start with a brief video from our partners from Caritas Internationalis, and we'll play the video now as we begin.
The Pacific Ocean is one of the places that is most affected by climate change. We can see how it's changing our lives, the land around us. Rising sea levels and big storms wash away our beaches. Salt water ruin our crops, and the most frequent strong cyclones destroy our schools, our hospitals, and our homes. But there's a bigger problem. We are facing money problems which are caused by these climate disasters. A new report from Caritas Oceania, it's called Weathering the Storm. It says that countries like my island home here in Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga have so much climate debt.
We know that when a big climate disaster hits a small island country like my homeland here in Tonga, it badly hurts our people and our economy. But now we face a new problem. Climate finance was supposed to help countries affected by climate change to rebuild and make our communities safer for the future. But when this money comes as loans and from corporations, we are left with more debt, weaker, and at risk of future economic crises.
That's why we're starting a new campaign to cancel and reduce debt and reform the systems around it. Be paid to climate finance and climate debt. The world owes a moral debt to countries that have contributed the least to climate change, but are paying the highest price for its impacts. This Jubilee year will focus on unjust debt, particularly that forced on the Pacific and other areas of the developing world at times of climate disaster for profit motives and without concern for their future. Come and join us on this campaign, and together we can bring justice and turn debt into hope.
Thank you to our friends from Caritas Oceania and Caritas Internationalis. Caritas Internationalis is launching campaigns in 160 countries on Pope Francis's message for debt relief for the Jubilee 2025 year. And turning debt into hope is one of the primary messages that Caritas Internationalis is lifting. Their work as organizers is incredibly exciting. We believe really at a grassroots and grass tops level is going to make very impactful change over the next 5 years as we move forward debt cancellation and international bankruptcy process and economic aid to deal with climate issues and poverty. Our first speaker that we're inviting, I don't believe Cardinal Turkson is online with us yet. When His Eminence joins us, we'll turn it over to him. But we're very grateful to have His Excellency Ronald Lamola with us, who is the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation for South Africa. South Africa will be hosting the G20 meetings this year during the Jubilee year. And Pope Francis has called upon the South African government for the G20, as well as for the Canadian government of the G7, to move forward these critical policies on debt relief to end poverty and address climate change. Your Excellency, Ronald Lamola, we would like to first turn the floor to you to be our first speaker. Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, so good to see you. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Program Director, Mr. Eric Lecomte, His Eminence Cardinal Salvino Tomas, His Eminence Cardinal Peter Turkson, fellow panelists from Caritas International. Good afternoon from South Africa. It is a very special honor for me to address you at this press conference, which is to launch campaigns on debt relief in 160 countries as part of the Catholic Church Jubilee 2025, or a holy year. My address today is in the context of South Africa's presidency of the Group of 20, the G20, a responsibility we hold from the 1st of December 2024 until 30 November 2025. We are fully aware that this presidency carries tremendous responsibility, given that the decisions taken by the G20 directly impact the lives of all members of the global community, notably the most vulnerable and needy. The 2024 United Nations Development Programme's UNDP Multidimensional Poverty Index reveals that approximately 1.1 billion of 6.3 billion people live in acute multidimensional poverty, over half of them children. Common deprivation include lack of inadequate housing, sanitation, electricity, cooking fuel, nutrition, and school attendance. While our global system could address pressing development challenges, it is instead excels at funding destruction and exploitative extraction. In a world where funding wars is prioritized over development and exploitation is chosen over solidarity, equality, and sustainability, the contrast is stark and disheartening. Our continent, the African continent, only receives less than 3% of international financing aimed at financing climate change, whereas it's the most disproportionate by climate change. We are not the biggest emitters in the African continent, but we are the most affected. So the global financial architecture needs to respond to this challenge. The global financial architecture also needs to be reformed to respond to the challenges of financing for development in the African continent. The bleak and disheartening global situation suggests that the international community requires a profound paradigm shift. These shifts can involve changing entrenched mindsets and proposing innovative, practical solutions. Changing the mindset requires the community of nations to do justice to the notion of the international community by identifying with each other, through solidarity, harmony, and mutual respect. This dictum, rooted in the African philosophy of Ubuntu, emphasizes interconnectedness, shared humanity, and collective responsibility. Central to the Ubuntu dictum is the common isiZulu phrase, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. I am because you are. This formulation prescribes that individuals in each society fully actualize as human beings when they realize and act in accordance with the realization that their well-being depends on the existence and well-being of their fellow members. In this way, society becomes a nurturing entity, embracing each person and fostering their growth as if the community breathes life into its members. Nation states cannot truly prosper as isolated islands in an ocean of poverty. This is contrary to the spirit of Ubuntu and the central transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals, which emphasize leaving no one behind. As Jesus of Nazareth taught, and I quote, "Do unto others as you will have them do unto you." Close quote. This timeless principle reminds us that we wish for ourselves should be what we wish for others. Building on this, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, through his categorical imperative, emphasized our moral duty to regard human beings as having inherent value, never to be treated merely as means to an end. These teachings together underscores the profound ethical responsibility we hold towards one another. In this context, we have chosen to hold our G20 presidency under the theme, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. If we harness our collective humanity and embrace our interconnectedness, then we can confront the enormous challenges the world is facing. By uniting in solidarity, striving for equality, and committing to sustainability, we aim to build a better future for all. Therefore, our commitment to these principles will lead us to a better future. South Africa will address these urgent challenges by building partnerships across all sectors of society, including with communities of faith. From these communities of faith, we seek moral direction and guidance in a world often lacking compassion and universal caring. Under our presidency, we have identified inequality as the most significant threat to our collective future. This inequality is most prevalent in the global south and is manifested through critical challenges such as lack of predictable and sustainable financing, a dire shortage of capacity building for climate action, and a crippling debt that forces many countries to abandon their development programs just to service exorbitant debt. The situation is also severe that it feels as if the entire nations are being suffocated under the weight of these overwhelming burdens. We acknowledge and appreciate the work of the Catholic Church under the leadership of His Holiness Pope Francis to urge the world to do more to free developing countries from the debt trap, which is causing untold misery and despair, and depriving the citizens of these countries their human dignity, stifling their ability to reach their full potential. We welcome the launch of the Debt Relief Initiative in 126 countries for the Jubilee of 2025, which will undoubtedly significantly help alleviate the economic and social distress in these countries. I wish to take this opportunity to announce that under South Africa's G20 presidency, an ambitious cost of capital commission will be established to investigate the issues that impair the ability of low and middle-income countries to access sufficient, affordable, predictable flows of capital to finance their environmental, impossible, and social inclusive development plans. This commission will deliver a comprehensive expert review on the issues impacting the cost of capital for developing economies, which could help address the future debt sustainability issues and the related fiscal space challenges. Tackling inequality to enable developing countries to lift themselves out of the quicksand of debt also requires accelerating reform of the international financial architecture. As the saying goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. By strengthening the financial system of developing nations, we strengthen the global economy. South Africa is fully aligned with the Roman Catholic Church call for a new international financial architecture that is human-centered, bold, creative, and based on the principles of equity, justice, and solidarity, delivered at COP29 in Baku in November 2024. Indeed, as stated by His Holiness, foreign debt and ecological debt are two sides of the same coin, namely the mindset of exploitation that has culminated into the debt crisis. We will use our G20 presidency to contribute to reinvigorating and strengthening multilateralism and creating consensus around issues that affect our collective future. To effectively respond to global realities, multilateral mechanisms and institutions must be strengthened and reformed. Beyond our collective humanity, this is a simple matter of our shared responsibility. We are inspired by the Pilgrims of Hope's theme for the 2025 Jubilee. We too believe that amid our many challenges, we must look to our future with hope and opportunity. Indeed, we call on faith leaders from across the globe to continue to guide us with their wisdom, compassion, and deep spirituality to restore hope and trust to the most vulnerable. We must not just reach out to each other in the name of our common humanity. We must also re-envision, reimagine how we wish to secure the world that we want, leaving no country and no one behind. From South Africa, in Mpumalanga, Hazy View, I thank all of you.
Thank you so much, Minister, and thank you for making those bold announcements today for the first time about how the South African G20 agenda will focus on debt cancellation and the calls of Pope Francis and other interfaith leaders. We are so grateful for your leadership that as the presidency of the G20 that will make major decisions on debt cancellation, international financial architecture, and economic reform, that you are working so closely with us on moving forward this critical agenda. We're very grateful that in South Africa you are working with our friends, Cardinal Brislin, Archbishop Suko, as well as Jewish communities, other Christian communities, and the international labor movement on winning these goals for Jubilee 2025 on debt cancellation, economic aid to address poverty and climate issues, and changes to the financial system, including an international bankruptcy process. Your leadership is tremendous, and we're very grateful that you are able to join us here today. As we continue the conference, again, we just will ask journalists to identify themselves in the chat, so when we get to the end of the session, you're able to ask publicly whatever questions you would like to analysts. And we're incredibly grateful to be moving this press agenda forward, as well as this conference, with our partners from Caritas Internationalis. We are delighted and very grateful to have joining us from Africa, Lucia Spiglia, the Executive Secretary of Caritas Africa. And I don't believe Cardinal Turkson has joined us yet. I think I will receive a message when he's with us. I don't believe Cardinal Turkson has joined. So I'm going to turn it to you now, Lucy, the Executive Director of Caritas African Catholic Relief Africa.
Thank you, Eric. Excellencies, fellow panelists and distinguished participants, good afternoon. And I'm really glad to have listened to the intervention by His Excellency Ronald Lamola talking about the presidency of South Africa and the G20 and some of the things that they need to work on. And our messages also align with exactly what he was talking about. Caritas Africa is one of the 7 regions of the Global Caritas Internationalist Confederation. Is pleased to add its voice to the Jubilee 2025 pilgrimage to tackle debt, end poverty, and heal our planet. The 46 member organizations that we are working with within Africa region operate in regions facing complex humanitarian, development, and peace challenges. And within such contexts, the economic environment often hinders the ability to address emerging needs and to develop sustainable economies that also prioritize environmental care due to the current glaring realities of climate change. You will see the video that was projected by Caritas Oceania and the issues that are being faced within Oceania, which are related to climate change. And without the fiscal space, we are unable to address such issues. And research on debt dynamics indicates that sovereign debt in more than half of African countries is considered vulnerable, with a changing landscape which is characterized by an increase in external debt and private creditors. And within this year, you will see that we have 20 low-income African countries which are either bankrupt or at a very high risk of debt distress. And I've seen that there are countries who have the largest government debts, which would include Sudan, Zambia, Cape Verde, Mozambique, Congo, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Ghana. Countries like Mozambique with these huge resources such as the gas that they are able to produce, but you see they have the large government debts that they are not able to service despite the many resources that they have, and they are unable to service debt. Countries like Sudan with oil. And so how do we shift this landscape? And we are working closely with our member organizations to raise awareness of this concern and to facilitate their engagement with policymakers so that they can dialogue with them and call for fiscal policies that reflect the perspectives of citizens. At an international level, this is what we are doing right now. It is crucial for us to advocate for the cancellation of unjust debt, particularly because the costs of borrowing for African nations continue to rise due to their classification as high risk. And we're spending a lot of money servicing debt instead of channeling this to social sectors. And as Pope Francis says, this is not an issue of generosity, but a justice issue. So we are calling for reforms to the overall financial architecture, and you heard the minister has also mentioned that, and also for a need to establish an effective multilateral debt framework. Additionally, we would like to call for a transparent and accountable governance system that will ensure that when we are receiving this debt relief, the decisions that will be made will benefit the communities that depend on different policymakers to make decisions on their behalf. Lastly, I would like to urge you all to join and support this important campaign that will be conducted in over 160 countries, and also to encourage you to sign the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that update, as well as the announcement from Caritas Internationalis about the global campaigns that are moving forward over the next 5 years. We're incredibly grateful for the partnership of Caritas Internationalis because they are the finest organizers in the church and among faith communities, and are mobilizing people around the world for the most ambitious campaigns on debt cancellation, debt relief, and international bankruptcy to serve the poor on the planet that we've ever seen before. And on that note, we are incredibly excited that Dr. Victor Janina is here with us today. He even changed his plane ticket to stay, to be a part of this press conference before he flies home to see his family in Mexico. Victor is the Director of Integral Human Development for Caritas Internationalis. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Victor.
Thanks to you, Eric, and thanks to all who are following this press conference, and also our friends here who are physically in person here at this room. Well, very happy to be able to be today announcing the launch of the campaign, the Caritas Confederation campaign, Turn Debt into Hope. I invite you to check the website we have. It's www.turnthatintohope.caritas.org, and you will find all the main information of the campaign. And I would like just to refer to the main issues that we want to share today with you. As you are well aware, most of you should know, the Jubilee tradition is about releasing the captives. And we are very concerned that the foreign debt crisis faced by most developing countries in the world is a silent phenomenon that does not receive the deserved attention. So we want to highlight the first objective of the campaign is highlighting how this phenomenon is affecting the possibilities of growth and development for developing countries. So the idea is that the Jubilee is a good opportunity to actualize this message of releasing the captives from the burden and the oppressive conditions that foreign debt brings. It's an open campaign. Yes, it's conducted by Caritas Internationalis, but it's open to other faith-based organizations and other civil society organizations. It's not exclusively a Catholic effort. We invite all people of goodwill to join us. Concretely, and as Lucy has already mentioned it, we pursue three main goals. The first one is to cancel and remedying unjust and unsustainable debts without economic conditions. That means we have to help the governments in the global south to have a sustainable debt and not an unsustainable and unjust debt. Second objective, in order to avoid these vicious circles of foreign debt that prevent countries for, decades, if not for the recent history of these countries, to reform the global financial architecture in a way that prioritizes people and the planet. And that's why we showed the video of Oceania, and we heard also from His Excellency Minister Lamola, and also from His Eminence Cardinal Tomasi, that we need to pair, and we have to bear in mind that the foreign debt is also a climate debt. We cannot advance in reaching the climate goals that we have to urgently achieve if we do not tackle the issue of foreign debt. So that's why if we want a just and also egalitarian society in the world, we need also to put into the same equation the issue of climate debt. And the third goal is to establish a permanent, transparent, binding, and comprehensive debt framework dealing with foreign debt within the United Nations, because of the opacity that is one of the main characteristics of the current system on foreign debt. We need to have much more transparency to make, especially, but not exclusively, private lenders accountable also. And finally, I would like just to mention that we are planning to take advantage from several international meetings that will take during 2025 in order to conduct advocacy activities. We are delighted to hear from Minister Lamola that South Africa's presidency of the G20 is going to make foreign debt one of its priorities. And that is why we are planning to conduct these advocacy activities in February during the G20 meeting, in June during the Conference on Financing for Development that is going to take place in Seville, Spain. Also, we will raise this issue during the 10th anniversary of the Laudatio Si encyclica that is going to take place in May. In October, during the Jubilee of the Poor. In July, the G7 meeting. And to close the year, and a very important gathering, the COP30 in Belém do Pará in Brazil for climate change, in order to raise awareness about the issue of foreign debt as one of the main causes for not achieving climate goals. And with this, I leave it here. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Victor. And we're so grateful that you've raised the questions of private sector debt, which we know most of the world is dealing with right now. And in particular, unfortunately, that many of those who hold private debt in the private sector are refusing to restructure or offer debt relief or get their debt back to profitability by restructuring. So it's absolutely critical that you raise that important message, and it's why during the Jubilee year of 2025, we are moving forward legislation in the world's two primary financial jurisdictions that govern private sector debt in the state of New York, the world's first financial jurisdiction, and then the close second is London. So we have legislation being reintroduced in New York, as well as moving forward in the UK, that we already have commitments for its passage. And also, Dr. Victor, thank you so much for raising the various places that Pope Francis has laid out for our agenda focus over the next year. And of course, that is Brazil hosting the COP30. It is South Africa, as we heard from His Excellency Lamola's wonderful words, hosting the G20, as well as Canada hosting the G7 next year, in preparation for the United States in 2026 to also host the G20. I think those particular areas that the global interfaith, interreligious community are focusing on, as well as the labor movement, are essential as we move forward this campaign for the next 5 years. And we reiterate the calls of the Holy Father on debt relief and debt cancellation. I don't believe that Cardinal Turkson has been able to join us yet from Ghana. We will invite him when he joins to speak. But at this time, we'd like to take questions from the journalists that are here with us at the Holy See press offices or online. If you are a journalist who's online, one of those who've registered, if you can please acknowledge yourself in the Q&A box, I'm told, you'll be given privileges to be able to ask questions online of the panel. So let me open it up to any questions. Cindy Wooden from Catholic News Services.
Could you explain what an international bankruptcy process is, what you would hope it would be, why doesn't it exist? I mean, how would it help this situation?
So thank you, Cindy. And do you want to ask your question again on the, so we can record you?
Sorry, that's
apologies.
okay. I was just wondering if you could explain what an international bankruptcy process or procedure is. How would it help in this situation? I mean, how is it different from simply a country defaulting?
on its foreign loans. And yeah, basically, thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Philip from Reuters, would you? Maybe you answer this first. Okay, very good. In terms of that international bankruptcy process that was first called by Pope John Paul II and signed in the petitions of more than 30 million people around the world, what it is it's about a shift to the international financial system. And it's why Pope Francis made it the major theme of his United Nations address in 2015. For too long, we've not had processes on debt relief that are fairly arbitrated. Unfortunately, most of debt relief that has been won under the campaigns of the Catholic Church and our interreligious partners, those campaigns were won by winning some debt cancellation, but not actual changes to the financial system. So we're dealing with problems of countries continually being trapped in debt. And right now, the majority of the world's countries are facing great financial crises. Only a few advanced economies and wealthy countries have actually recovered from the crisis and the pandemic. We have looked now that there are more than 2 decades of lost development for Latin America, Asia, and Africa. That poverty has increased, and the reality is, without a structure that exists in every domestic economy around the world on bankruptcy, without a fair structure, we are left with countries continuing to deal with crisis. An international bankruptcy process, like we have in most of our countries under domestic law, and also called by, for the founders of our financial system, without that particular process in place, what it means is that countries do not have a solution for dealing with continual crises. So an international bankruptcy process, as Pope John Paul II has called for Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, and led by the work of Cardinal Silvano, it creates a permanent process so that countries will not only not face crisis, but countries will have the economic aid they need to be able to deal with poverty and climate issues. So it's about establishing the same type of process we have that creates essential financial stability in our domestic economies by corporations and states being able to file bankruptcy and work through a bankruptcy process. By adding that to the international financial system, not only will that support developing countries in being able to avoid crisis, it will also support developed countries. And this actual process is essential if we want to keep inflation under control, as well as deal with some of the high import-export costs that right now the world is facing on food and fuel. So an international bankruptcy process is called for by the Catholic Church and our interreligious partners is ultimately about creating a mechanism for financial stability, a continual process for debt relief, as well as a process that will also favor creditors to being able to make their debt profitable again. So it's a very similar process to what we have in every domestic economy in the world, and now bringing that process to the international financial system. Did I answer your question, Cindy?
So it sets out though, like, excuse me, it would set out, it would kind of examine the resources that the country in debt does have and kind of like schedule payments, but also offer relief? Is that what that does?
Yes, and it would be a very clear process. So right now, we don't have a transparent process for how countries deal with debt crisis and financial crisis. They can get some relief or restructuring through the International Monetary Fund and other processes, but all of the processes are separate and not one process at this point. So essentially, we'd be moving forward on Pope Francis's call, a universal process where the rules are clear, the negotiations are transparent, where both what the creditor country has, the debtor country has, as well as the creditors has, is completely transparent and on the table. So it's a transparent, open process that involves all the creditors and the country, so that not only can they get the relief they need, but the debt can become profitable again. So, one of the founders of our financial system, Adam Smith, who is considered to be a very conservative thinker, had noted that what was missing and was most important from the financial system was a continual bankruptcy process like we have in most countries. Pope Francis has reiterated this call from Pope John Paul II, because we need transparency. We need to have one process that everyone is a part of and the rules are clear. Currently in the financial system, the process is not transparent. We don't know how debt relief happens. And in addition to it not being transparent, all of the creditors are part of different and separate negotiations, whereas bankruptcy in our domestic laws brings everyone together in a transparent, open process. And having such a process will mean that countries will no longer be in continual crisis, that the process itself will start to dissolve some of the worst financial crises we're seeing around the world. Did I get it a little better, Cindy? Philip Rutella.
Yeah, Phil Pulella. For the record, I'm no longer with Reuters. I have a question for Mr. Lecomte and also one for Mr. Janina. For Mr. Lecomte, like in the debt release has been an issue for the church for a long time. You've mentioned that it was already a big issue, big theme in the 2000 Jubilee. So the question for you is, how have the international monetary organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank in these past 25 years, have they become more accommodating to what you're talking about? Have they put on the brakes? How have things changed? And then for you, Mr. Giannini, you spoke about the link between climate change and debt relief and how it's more or less inextricable, and it will be. But the incoming American administration will most probably withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement, as President Trump did before. President Biden returned it. But if that happens as expected, how do you think that this will affect the debt relief situation?
Thank you, Philip. Dr. Victor, if you'd like to respond first.
Well, of course, it's going to have a negative impact. I think other key players at the international level should be aware of this, that they have to redouble their commitment in order to avoid a domino effect in the way states, especially developed Western states, are facing the responsibility they have to honor according to their commitments. For example, the agreement reached in Baku is completely insufficient. So we hope that even though the US is going to withdraw from the Paris agreements, other key actors, mainly the European Union, but also Canada, Australia, New Zealand, can be aware of the need, if we really want to tackle the goals, for example, the 1.5 centigrade degree, they have to do more. And of course, one of the ways they can help in releasing resources from the developing world also is restructuring foreign debt. because that is a way in which they can help also. It's not only to fund all the programs that have to be implemented, both to prevent the rise of temperatures and also all the programs that have to be implemented in adaptation, for example. But also, I mean, they can help a lot if they show solidarity with the restructuring process and the cancellation of foreign debt on the side of developing countries.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. And just to add to that, much of the ambitious debt relief work we're doing now began during the first term of the Trump administration. So we know that there are commitments from the incoming Trump administration on debt relief and economic aid to deal with poverty. And that's largely because of the leadership of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and our interreligious partners in the United States, where we know that we'll be able to move forward many policies on debt with the incoming Trump administration. Philip, in terms of your questions around what's happened over the past 25 years, really because of Pope John Paul II, the leadership of the church and the interreligious movement, we have won more than $130 billion in debt relief for the world's poorest countries. The IMF and World Bank have increased and reformed policies on debt restructuring, and the International Monetary Fund will be releasing a paper for Jubilee 2025 in the next few months around advancements they believe are necessary around laws in New York, as well as changing and improving debt restructuring. Have they done enough? No. And that's precisely why Pope Francis has renewed the call for Jubilee 2025 to finish the unfinished work of Jubilee 2000. While there's been many advancements on transparency, on debt relief, restructuring, and economic aid in the international financial system, many of which Cardinal Silvano is responsible for, while there have been those advancements, we know that there is not enough yet in terms of actually moving forward an actual transparent bankruptcy process and ensuring debt cancellation. And that's also precisely why Caritas Internationalis has picked up Pope Francis's call for 5 years of campaigns in order for us to finish the unfinished business of Jubilee 2000. Thank you. I don't know if there are any other questions online or any other questions from our audience here. I think Cardinal Turkson, unfortunately, has been unable to join us from Ghana. We will also share with the media his remarks of December 10th in expounding upon Pope Francis's call with his ambitious speech on the need for debt relief, debt cancellation, and an international bankruptcy process. Philip?
I just, another question, if I may, go back to Cindy's question. If there is a international bankruptcy court, let's call it that, what are you going to do to make sure that that people actually join, that countries actually join? You do realize that you're going to run into the same problem as the International Criminal Court has, that some nations recognize it and some nations don't recognize it. We've seen just recently with South Africa and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. So you could do something, but then another country says, well, I don't recognize you, so you can do what you want. How are you going to face that possibility?
That's a great question. What's the enforceability of an international bankruptcy process once we're successful in implementing it? And I think His Excellency Lamola was the one who lifted some of the answers to that. The reality is that if the G20 implements it, such a process would become not only effective, but ultimately it would essentially be decisive for all countries because the G20 has the majority of the votes in the International Monetary Fund. It would create a new existing process in the financial system. So to your question, in 2015, we were successful in moving the United Nations to actually implement and pass and support an international bankruptcy process, the very same process that Pope Francis called on the United Nations to implement. But that process was not enforceable, it was not implemented, and the primary financial jurisdictions of the world rejected that process. And so that's why decision by the G20 is essential, both to implement the process in the financial system, as well as move forward the process in the International Monetary Fund. As important as United Nations agreements are, that Cardinal Silvano has won a number of very critical international agreements at the United Nations. If you don't have countries buying in, like you're saying, it's not necessarily enforceable. And so that's why we need to make sure the G20 makes the decision, as His Excellency Lamola noted, in terms of implementation, and that process then would also become binding on the International Monetary Fund. So we're very interested in a binding, enforceable process. And a binding, enforceable process needs to be implemented and agreed upon by the G20. In many ways, that doesn't sound fair, because the United Nations, as the primary global organization that represents every country, one would hope that those agreements become binding. But we don't live in a fair world. The binding agreements are made by the G20 and then thus the International Monetary Fund. So as we close, I would like to turn to both Cardinal Silvano, if he has any final words, as well as Dr. Victor Jania. I really want to thank Caritas Internationalis, our partners from around the world who joined us for this event. And we know that the Global Jubilee Movement, Jubilee USA Network, and Caritas Internationalis will continue to move forward this agenda from Pope Francis and the Church. Cardinal Silvano, do you have any final words you'd like to share?
I can ask a question.
Yes, you are allowed to ask any question, Cardinal.
Do you think that the international system will come up with a mechanism that will regulate the dealing between developed and developing countries, so that the conditions that are placed and the negotiations between rich countries and poor countries can be controlled in some form?
So, Cardinal Silvano, I am very optimistic, and I do want to note that Cardinal Silvano was the first person at the United Nations to lay out some of the specific conditions for an international bankruptcy process when he was the nuncio in Geneva. And so, especially with Caritas Internationalis and this new movement for 5 years of work that Pope Francis has called upon, I'm actually quite optimistic that eventually we can implement such a process. And hearing the words from His Excellency Lamola today about making it a primary piece of the South African agenda, I believe that it's not only probable, but it's very possible. The implementation of such changes to the international financial architecture are no longer a question of if. I think they're simply a question of when. And based on these new campaigns, Cardinal Silvano, I believe that we will have the momentum to move forward such a process with the G20 and the G7. And also thanks to your work for being the first person to lay out the specifics of such a process to the United Nations. Dr. Victor.
Thank you, Eric. Just to thank again all those who are following us online, and to thank those who are here with us, and to thank you, Eric, for this great initiative of the press conference. To also to take this opportunity to thank publicly His Eminence Silvano Tomasi. I have learned a lot from him when he was nuncio in Geneva, all those who were during these years in the diplomatic community. We really learned a lot from him, so it's a privilege to be here. And just a final invitation to all of you. I mean, we are 1.4, if I'm not mistaken, Catholics in the world. So probably
1.4 billion.
Yes, 1.4 billion, sorry. So probably if we get the 10%, that would be 140 million people who can sign the petition. If you get into the website that I will repeat now, it's www.turndeadintohope.caritas.org. Please sign the petition so you can help us in that way to do a stronger and more effective advocacy at the international level. And with this, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. And our final thanks today goes out to all the journalists who joined us today, as well as joined us online covering this vital issue before Pope Francis's announcement on Christmas Eve around our debt relief campaigns. We also, in a very special way, want to thank the Vatican Press Office and Communication Offices for hosting us, as well as giving us the amazing staff, Daniela and others, who have made this event very successful today. We also want to thank the team from Caritas Internationalis who worked on this event, as well as our team from Jubilee USA, Aldo Cagliari and Selma Alakozai, who've worked all weekend on promoting the event. So we're so grateful that you could be with us today as we are in Rome for the announcement of 5 years of Jubilee campaigns. And a special thank you to Cardinal Silvano Tomasi for joining us in person, as well as Dr. Victor, Lucy Espiela, as well as our other panelists and Caritas Oceana today. Thank you. Yes.